Imagine what would happen if we lose our natural ability to breathe. It'll be a disaster. Nature has given us this innate capability of breathing because it cannot be left to chance. So we run it on autopilot. But in some patients who have to be on a ventilator for a fairly long period of time, this problem happens quite frequently. They lose their natural ability to breathe. Now we have a very nice, innovative solution in the marketplace, which is helping a lot of patients. And today we're going to talk about this story right from the concept phase to launch and all the risk based decisions that had to be made along the way. Hi, everyone. I'm Naveen Agarwal. And today I'm super excited to welcome Viral Thakkar, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Lungpacer. Now, this is a fascinating story that I followed right from the COVID days, and I'm so glad we are having a chance to talk about this in detail. So, Viral, with that, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thank you, Naveen. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me here. I have been following your podcast and you're doing a great work.
Thank you so much. Now, Viral, you have been with Lungpacer for a fairly long period of time, 14 years, I believe.
That is correct.
Right from the concept phase when it was an idea in the lab and you were involved in the early development, early testing, going through the EUA phase with the FDA during the COVID years, and now finally achieving a PMA. So, what a journey it has been. Share with us some key moments in this journey that really stand out to you.
Yeah, it's been an amazing journey. Um, I started Lungpacer 14 years ago, when it was a concept in university lab, basically. I moved to Canada and I met this professor, in Simon Fraser University who has this concept of stimulating phrenic nerves, transvenously. What attracted me about Lungpacer, was the audacity, of the mission. It was developing a novel technology to stimulate the phrenic nerves to contract the diaphragm muscles. It wasn't just another product, it was entirely a new way of thinking about critical care, like you mentioned. Patients who are on mechanical ventilator is life sustaining, but it comes with its negative things, because it's non-natural way, of ventilating the patients. So yeah, early phases, we started working together and, we had just the concept in mind, right? So, we had to go through the whole, product development, of the Lungpacer medical device. At that time, we didn't even have a quality system. The first task was to, implement the quality system because it was just a lab-based project. So we started to implement the quality system because over the years, what I've learned, if you implement the quality and risk management earlier on, it helps basically, down the road, with the product development actually, as well as, getting product, to the finish line faster. So we implemented the quality system. We formulated a structured, product development process. And we took this through 3 different iterations, of product. We did lots of, bench studies, lab studies, as well as, we did first in man study because this was never done before. So there were a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of things that we learned over the time. And then we took this product through 3 clinical trials, Rescue 1, Rescue 2, and Rescue 3, finally getting a PMA approval last year. So it's been an exciting journey.
Nice. Congratulations. Now, before we dig into that, Viral, help us understand what the problem is and how Lungpacer solves this problem.
Yeah. So, there are about 2.5 million patients, on mechanical ventilator every year just in US. And, like I mentioned, the mechanical ventilator is life sustaining, but it comes with its cost. When we naturally breathe, what happens is, our brain sends signals through our phrenic nerves. There are 2 phrenic nerves, left and right, 2 hemidiaphragms, and then diaphragms contract. That generates the negative pressure in thoracic cavity, and our lungs expand, and take air in, and then when our expiratory muscles, relax, basically, we breathe out, right? So that's the natural way of breathing. But when patients are put on mechanical ventilator, they are sedated because they come with whatever, like pneumonia or respiratory distress, or neurological impairment or some sort of, injury. They are sedated because they are put on mechanical ventilator, and mechanical ventilator is very uncomfortable. So the diaphragm becomes inactive because the ventilator takes over all the breathing. So brain doesn't have to send the signal, to the diaphragm. So it takes over all the, breathing. So diaphragm becomes inactive. And as like any other muscles, if we don't use it, it atrophies. So diaphragm atrophies very, very quickly. There is a publication that talks about diaphragm atrophying half of its size within 18 to 69 hours. right? And now ventilator is pushing air into the lungs, so positive pressure injures the lungs as well. In clinical terms, it's called ventilator-induced lung injury. The other thing that happens is diaphragm helps heart in blood circulation. Because now diaphragm is inactive, the heart has to work harder. And the latest thing that is talked in respiratory world is when patients are put on mechanical ventilator, they go through cognitive impairment. So that is another side effect of mechanical ventilation. So all those things, I don't know if you had any, loved one or anybody, that was on mechanical ventilator. It's a traumatic experience for patient, for families. And I've seen many patients, they can't talk because they have tube in their throat. Everything is dry. They can't control what's going on around them. It's a very traumatic experience.
So what I'm hearing you say is that Lungpacer will help them come off of the ventilator quickly and help them recover this normal breathing function. Do I understand that correctly from you?
Yeah. So there are about 40% patients who die on mechanical ventilator, and about 38% patients who are unable to wean more than 4 days on mechanical ventilator. Because when patients are on mechanical ventilator, they're put on mechanical ventilator for a reason. But let's say they come in the hospital with pneumonia, right? And pneumonia is cured. Now it's time for them to breathe on their own. They can't because their diaphragm is now atrophied. Their lungs are now injured, right? So, what our studies have shown is we can, by exercising the diaphragm muscle, by contracting the diaphragm through phrenic nerve stimulation, we can reduce the ventilator time by up to 3 days on an average. And we can improve the diaphragm strength by 50% by exercising the diaphragm muscles through transvenous stimulation. We can reduce the risk of reintubation by 60%. And, 35% more patients, weaned um, as compared to the control group in our studies. So that's the value proposition of Lungpacer to these patients.
It's fantastic because I think this is the reason why FDA granted the breakthrough device designation to Lungpacer in 2016, even before the COVID years.
That is
Right?
correct. Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, so we constantly talk to FDA about the product development and the regulatory strategy, as well as constant communication with FDA is very important. We have a great regulatory team. It's amazing having those proactive pre-subs and having conversations with FDA. We applied for a breakthrough designation in 2015. As you said, breakthrough designation program is FDA's way of, I guess, fast tracking game-changing technologies, right? Basically are able to solve a serious problem. And for that problem, there is no other solution that exists. So Lungpacer fell into both those, categories basically, as well as, again, to get the approval, we had to show the safety and efficacy of the device. And that's what we did, through our studies basically.
So to understand how it actually works, it's a device that will be used in the ICU or in the hospital environments, not something that is implanted and the patient goes away. So help us understand how it is used. And one question particularly for you is, while the patient is on ventilator, do you go in and get started with this, or you go in when the patient is about to get off the ventilator?
Yeah, those are great questions. So how the technology works, it's a temporary device. We have a neurostimulation device that goes into the central line, either left subclavian or left jugular. So it's like putting any other catheter, basically. It's a bedside procedure, very quick, and clinicians are used to doing this bedside procedure. The central lines are in existence for a long time. So it follows the same platform for insertion of the device. And this device has 30 electrodes. So two groups of electrodes, one to target the left nerve and one to target the right nerve. And the same device, can target both the nerves. And the placement is very similar to any other central line. And the good thing is, we have the functionality in the device to be able to deliver the drugs, to be able to, sample the blood. Most of these patients, will require a central line, right? This device can be used as a central line, so these patients don't need another line. That was the idea. And when will this device use? So the Aeropace system that is approved by FDA, through PMA, the indication is, if patients are on mechanical ventilator for 96 hours and they're unable to wean, then they can start to use the device and, exercise the diaphragm muscles to help them wean faster.
So a decision will be made by the doctor to use the device at a certain point of time when they judge that the patient may not be able to wean off of the ventilator and
That
go
is
home,
correct.
right? So this is just absolutely fascinating. And I think that is why I was particularly fascinated by this during the COVID years because I was looking at the new technology coming in, diagnostic testing and so much discussion about ventilator. But when I learned the first time about lung pacer, I said, wow, nobody thought about this problem. And this is probably a very real problem because so many patients were going into ventilation. Nobody thought about them coming out of it. And what happens when they try to come out of it? And I was so amazed by this technology. So help us understand, because EUA is not a full PMA or a regulatory approval. It is sort of a risk-based decision that the FDA made at that time using whatever data they had. And I'm guessing that they had some exposure to lung pacer since 2016 onwards, and they had some data. So where were you at the time of onset of COVID that FDA felt it was safe enough for it to be granted EUA?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, like I mentioned, we had done, like first in man studies, feasibility studies, and then we have completed a study in US that was a feasibility study, which was Rescue 1, and then we had completed a Rescue 2 study that was in Europe, which was a randomized study, 110 patients. And we were in the middle of Rescue 3 study. So FDA had seen the device, they had seen the risk profile, through multiple studies that we had, performed before. Based on the data, again, the COVID time was very scary. Nobody knew like what's going to happen. It was completely unknown territory that we were all living in, right? And there was almost like efforts from every different organization to figure out what are the solutions, because at that time ventilator shortage as well as patients with COVID had a very less survival rate if they go on mechanical ventilators. So those were big things that we found out. So based on the data and the safety profile, they moved very quickly to give the emergency use authorization during the COVID period, actually, for lung pacer device. And I've seen patients that were on ventilator for couple of months and they couldn't wean off, but the technology was able to help them wean from the ventilator.
Wow, what an amazing story. So Viral, this is Let's Talk Risk. So we talk about risk here. And my next question for you is to look back throughout this whole concept to development to launch and commercialization cycle. And if you can share with us an experience where you had to make some trade-offs. Now, we know that risk-based decisions are not black and white absolute decisions. They are always in the gray zone. And there's a chance that your decision may not be the right decision. So can you help us kind of understand how you approached risk-based decision making on such a really amazing technology, but also quite complicated technology?
Yeah, I mean, great question, Naveen. In medtech startups, right, we all live the tension between innovation, safety, speed, every day. At Lungpacer, we prioritize patient safety the first, right? But you're right, actually, there are trade-offs that you have to make. There are risks everywhere. And you can't walk away from risks. If people walk away from risk, nobody will try to develop a product that is this complex, right? So the idea is, how do you manage risk, more intelligently and, putting a structure together, right? We did have to make a lot of decisions, and we do that every day. And every day when we make that decision, we go through a structured process. Patient safety comes first, right? To give you an example, when we were trying to brainstorm on the device, there are a few different options that we can use with regards to materials for the neurostimulation device. The two winning options were, one was using the standard materials that have established biocompatibility profile, but then have limited features, And the other option was to use the new state of art, materials, basically, flex circuits and everything, and have more features available, and more usability, right? I think we made a very careful decision to develop both, in parallel, because the new materials, you have to do testing, to show the biocompatibility profile for that device. So it takes longer, right? So, again, that is a business risk that you're taking, but it does bring more features versus the other one. It may be shorter to get a regulatory approval for investigational device use and start collecting data, on patients, because this has never been done before. So, we made a, very careful determination at that time that We're going to take the device, that has established biocompatibility profile from the material standpoint, and we're going to start to study the device used, and the safety profile and the effectiveness profile, and then in parallel, develop the new technology, basically. So we have that earlier than later, and we were fortunate to have management and our investors support that endeavor where we could take both in parallel and go and do the study quickly, with the device that can be approved, sooner.
Great. So, this is a very nice sort of a fortunate circumstance that I'm hearing from you. Generally, it's not very easy, especially in a small startup environment, to sort of propose this idea of parallel path approach because resources are so limited, timelines are so squeezed, funding is not available. And I'm curious, how did you manage to overcome that initial pushback, maybe, or resistance or skepticism on part of your key stakeholders at the highest level? Because I think there's a lesson here potentially for our viewers to understand how to message, how to give the message and options to senior management so they can make the right decision. So help us live through that journey a little bit more. Give us a little bit more color about that.
I think communicating, pathway, or this is the strategy that we should take, right? To senior management, or even, to your team, it's very important. And what I believe is, if it's logical, if there is enough rationale on, what you're proposing, I think, it's going to be easier, to be accepted as well as adapted, as a strategy or a solution. I generally tend to follow a very structured process. So my process basically involves what is the objective, what is the issue that we are trying to solve, right? So do a little bit more in-depth analysis of that, why we want to do this, or what is going to benefit us, basically, and then collect as much data as possible. I believe data is a friend. So look at all the criterias that'll affect one decision versus the other, or one, if you go one way or the other way, right? Look at the cost, safety, efficacy, speed to do this, right? Resources that are needed, everything that is possible, and what is the benefit it's going to provide if we take one approach versus the other approach. And then I like to bring in all the stakeholders, to brainstorm on it and get a little bit more ideas. There may be some things that I may not be thinking, but if you bring, cross-functional collaborators to that approach, that helps get a strong case or strong foundation. And after that, you start to rate, this option objectively, like, what this option can provide versus what that option can provide. Now you have a, strong case to take it to management, where, you're well informed. If they start to ask questions, you have answers. You have thought through scenarios. What if this and what if that? And now your case starts to make a lot more sense and becomes much stronger, for them to accept.
Wonderful. What I'm hearing you say is that there is a strategic aspect to the work we do as quality, regulatory, or risk professionals. There is a higher strategic aspect where we can play a much bigger role than just telling people this is what 14971 says, or this is what this regulation says. Are we in compliance or not? We have to do all that. We cannot do anything that is not in compliance, right? That's the bottom line. But what I'm hearing you say is we have to think broader and play a more strategic role in our organization. So my question to you, did that come to you kind of naturally, or you learned it along the way as your career evolved? So I want to move into that a little bit to learn a little bit more about your personal story and your personal journey about how you became so capable of doing this. I'm sure initially you had some challenges. Can you share some of that experience with us?
I think I acquired all these things, through my experience, basically, working on, different products. I've been fortunate, to spend my career in product development and medical device industry, from early stage to commercialization, for more than 2 decades, working in first-in-kind technologies, basically, that are at the intersection of engineering and clinical need. My early experience, goes to mainly hands-on engineering on design. I worked on device, a robotic tissue stapling and cutting device, powered robotic tissue stapling and cutting device. Then I worked on a catheter, to do the intravascular temperature management or induce hypothermia for hypothermia therapy. I worked on a product basically that was embolic protection for carotid stenting. And then I worked on a lot of cardiovascular stents and peripheral stents. All these earlier experiences, what I've learned is quality mindset from the beginning, risk mindset from the beginning, right? Follow the process, understand the process basically, because I think the structured process is very important, in medical device industry. What I've learned is I think stakeholders play an important role. And in medical device development, there are a lot of stakeholders and team members, that matter because they bring different perspectives like clinical, regulatory, marketing, business aspect, engineering, quality, right? All those, play a vital role. So what I've learned over the years is understanding different perspectives earlier on to make a case and your thoughts to make a decision is very important.
So, what I'm hearing you say is it involves a couple of key elements. The first one really is to have a strong credibility, which you had through your enormous work experience working across multiple products and developing these sort of engineering skills and also intuition about what might work, what might not work. You had this credibility. And then the second element that you talked about is work in a cross functional team, understand what your stakeholders want, get different perspectives, play out different scenarios, build a good case before you go into senior management. And for that, I think I might add maybe consider doing a rehearsal, maybe consider doing sort of a playthrough with a mentor or a trusted colleague or maybe a small group of people to poke holes in your arguments and ask questions that business people might ask. Eventually, what I'm hearing you say is that these types of problems offer an enormous opportunity to our colleagues in QA, RA, and risk management world, where we have a chance now to play a more strategic role as things get a lot more difficult and complex, right? That's what I'm hearing you say. So, what I'm curious to learn from you, Viral, is how did you transition from an engineering subject matter expert into a leadership role in the executive suite? What was that journey like? And what were some of the key pivotal moments in your career that you feel prepared you to take on such a role?
Yeah. So, earlier on, what I realized, Naveen, is I love startup environment because, startups are at the intersection of creativity and execution. You get to build, something meaningful from ground up, right? Wear multiple hats, learn a lot, see the immediate impact of your decisions. It's fast, it's challenging, it keeps you learning every single day. So it was very important, so that was the mindset, when I got into Lungpacer, 14 years ago. As the company evolved, so did I. I moved from product development into operations leadership to get more and more broader picture, of the business. I played a role on quality, as I mentioned before, product development, manufacturing, supply chain, all those activities, because again, in startup, you have very limited resources, earlier
Mhm.
on, right? Because you're trying to execute things, with limited resources. So, that was the beginning. So I tried to fill the gaps, as much as possible, and that allowed me to learn more and grow in my career. So now, I do see my role not just as managing systems, but building teams that are accountable, and inspired by a single purpose, to help patients.
What's most important in your story, I think, since you mentioned, I noticed that you had the courage to stick with it. You stayed in that role for 14 years. In the early phase, probably you had no guarantee of success. You didn't know. You didn't know what's going to happen in 2024 that you will get a PMA. You didn't know what would happen in 2016 that you'll get a breakthrough designation. But I think you had the courage and the foresight to stay with it, which is probably the third quality I would say we need to nurture as risk professionals, to have that courage to know what we want to do and how we want to contribute so that we can play that bigger role. So, on that note, I'm sure you probably also learned from your mistakes. Share an experience that stands out to you where looking back, you say, wow, I'm glad that I had that experience. And during that time, probably you felt pretty bad about it. But later on, looking back, you say, I'm glad that I went through that. Can you share an example of that?
I mean, there are many examples.
Yes.
I'll share a story with you, that is a little bit personal to me. So when I was done with my schooling, I wanted to do engineering really, really badly, and I wanted to work in medical device industry since the beginning. But fortunately, growing up in India, I had an option to go to med school because I had, the scores to get into a med school as well as an engineering school. Like I said, I wanted to be, going to engineering school, but I think, at that time, for some reason, I chose a med school and I went to med school for about, 6, 7 months, realizing Well, I think my passion is really engineering. I'm glad I went to med school. I got to learn a lot, but I'm glad too that I was able to change the trajectory back to, engineering. That's where my passion was.
That's an awesome story. Thank you for sharing that with us, Viral. And really so inspiring to me to hear that from a leader like you. Because what matters is the game we are playing now, not the thing that happened in the past. That is how most successful athletes behave in a match. If they lose a point, they don't obsess over a point. They focus on the point they're going to win next. So the fact that you went to med school first and then switched to engineering actually is an enormously beneficial experience to you because now you know better. You know where you perform your best, and that perspective probably help you in your career later on in understanding the full implications of your engineering designs on patients and from medical perspective. So what a great story. I hope our audience will be inspired by your personal story. Viral, as we close, I do have to ask you one question. Where is Lungpacer heading next? Because I see a very bright future for you. Tell us a little bit about your future plans.
Yeah, again, Lungpacer, we just got FDA approval. So, we are working towards commercializing this device in United States. As well as, we are working on the next generation technology. Currently, the product is approved for patients, who are on mechanical ventilator for 96 hours. And the product, helps exercise the diaphragm muscles to liberate the patients, faster. But, our vision is, why even let diaphragm atrophy? Why even let lungs injure? As soon as patients are put on mechanical ventilator, why not, we go and stimulate their diaphragm, more physiologically. So there is a positive and negative pressure ventilation both, and minimize the harmful effects, of mechanical ventilator. That way, we won't even need to worry about that liberation phase because when patients are ready to wean off of mechanical ventilator, they're able to do. So that's our vision, and that's what we are working towards.
Fantastic. I wish you all the best. This is thinking more prevention than fixing the problem once it happens. So, thank you for sharing that story with us. I wish you all the best and can't wait to see that come out in the next couple of years. Sooner the better. Viral, once again, I'm deeply grateful to you for taking this time out of your busy schedule to talk with us and sharing your personal story as well as inspiring us with the journey you have been on.
Thank you, Naveen.